Chapter 1. Perfect Illusions. The scent of jasmine and deception hung heavy in the air as Elena Morgan stood before the ornate mirror in her assigned chambers. The woman staring back was unrecognizable. Dark hair twisted into an intricate crown braid that had taken the Pack's beautician 4 hours to achieve. Foundation applied with the precision of an artist preparing a canvas rather than a woman preparing for love. 23 years of existence, and this was meant to be her defining moment. The day she finally proved her worth. The day she stopped being the charity case and became someone who mattered. Stand still. Margaret Morgan's voice sliced through the morning stillness like ice wrapped in velvet. Her stepmother moved with the calculated precision of someone who had spent 12 years as second in command of the Silver Crescent Pack. Every movement deliberate, every word weighted for maximum effect. Alpha Thorne expects excellence today. Elena's fingers trembled on the diamond choker, another borrowed piece, like everything else she'd been given. I'm not moving. I'm just anxious. Good. Anxiety means you comprehend what's at risk. Margaret's reflection materialized beside hers in the mirror. Platinum blonde hair pulled into her signature tight chignon. Ice blue eyes, so different from Elena's warm hazel, swept over her stepdaughter with the clinical assessment she might give a battle formation. This union strengthens our alliance with the Iron Veil Pack. Damien is extending you an extraordinary opportunity. The words landed in Elena's stomach like lead weights. An opportunity. That's what her wedding had become. Charity offered to the orphaned girl who had nowhere else to turn. She remembered that rain-soaked night 13 years ago when Alpha Thorne had found her in the woods, 10 years old, drenched in her parents' blood, shaking so violently she could barely breathe. He'd knelt beside her with what she'd interpreted as compassion and sworn she would always have sanctuary here. What he hadn't mentioned was that sanctuary came with a price tag, and today she would finally settle the debt. The decorations arrived this morning, Margaret continued, adjusting Elena's choker with sharp, efficient movements. White peonies and eucalyptus, exactly as Damien specified. The photographer is preparing the grand ballroom. Representatives from 5 packs will observe your vows. 5 packs, including their long-standing adversaries, the Night Ridge Pack, who had been invited as part of some political chess game Elena didn't fully comprehend. The thought of their alpha, Kieran Ashford, watching her pledge herself to Damien made her skin prickle with unexplained apprehension. Margaret, Elena's voice emerged smaller than intended. Do you think Damien has feelings for me? The silence stretched between them like a vast chasm. When Margaret finally responded, her tone carried the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a dim student. Feelings are a luxury, Elena. You've been sheltered, educated, and protected by this pack for 13 years. Thorne could have abandoned you in those woods to perish with your parents, but he didn't. He brought you here, gave you his name, raised you as his daughter. Her fingers tightened on Elena's shoulders. This marriage is how you honor that sacrifice. Damien needs a mate who understands loyalty, who knows her position. You're ideal for him. The words were meant to comfort, but they felt like bars closing around her ribs. Elena had spent her entire teenage years watching Damien treat her with the casual indifference reserved for furniture. Present when convenient, forgotten when not. She'd convinced herself it would transform after their mating ceremony, that the bond would draw them closer. Now, gazing at her reflection, she questioned whether she was deceiving herself. Besides, Margaret added, stepping back to evaluate her work, what alternatives do you have? You're 23 with no mate prospects, no special abilities, no family wealth. Damien is the future alpha of this pack. Marrying him makes you Luna. That's more than most orphans could ever hope to achieve. The reminder struck its target. Elena was nothing without the Thorne name. Nothing without this pack's protection. She'd learned that lesson young, observing other orphaned wolves struggle on the margins of pack society. Never quite accepted, never quite secure. A gentle knock disrupted her spiraling thoughts. Enter, Margaret called. Damien Thorne filled the doorway, and for a heartbeat Elena's breath caught. At 26, he embodied everything an alpha's heir should be. Tall, powerfully built, with the kind of effortless charisma that drew wolves to him like moths to flame. His chestnut hair was impeccably styled, his steel-gray eyes sharp with intelligence. And when he smiled, it was the same charming expression that had convinced half the unmated females in their territory that they might capture his interest. None of them had. Only Elena, the convenient selection. "Don't you look stunning?" he said, but his gaze traveled over her with the detached appreciation of someone evaluating a business asset. "The gown fits perfectly." Elena looked down at the wedding dress she'd be wearing in 2 hours. Ivory silk that had cost more than most pack members earned in 6 months, with delicate lace detailing that caught the morning light like captured moonbeams. It was gorgeous, extravagant, and it felt like a costume for a role she wasn't certain she wanted to perform. "Thank you," she managed. "You look handsome as well." Damien's smile widened, though something flickered in his eyes too quickly for her to interpret. "I should let you complete your preparations. The ceremony begins at 11, and Father wants to review the vows with me one final time." He leaned forward and pressed a chaste kiss to her forehead. The kind of gesture that should have felt romantic, but instead felt like a blessing bestowed by a benevolent stranger. After he departed, Margaret resumed her preparations with renewed efficiency. More hairspray, lipstick adjustments, a final tweak to the dress's cathedral train. Each addition felt like armor being fitted for battle rather than adornments for celebration. "Remember," Margaret said as she fastened the final clasp on Elena's bracelet. "Smile during the ceremony. Appear happy. The other packs will be watching for any indication of discord, any vulnerability they can exploit later." Elena nodded, practicing the expression in the mirror. Radiant bride, grateful mate, perfect Luna to be. The lies came easier with repetition. When they finally exited the room, Elena's reflection lingered in the mirror like a specter. In 2 hours, she would stand before the assembled packs and promise her life to a man who viewed her as a political necessity. She would smile and perform her part, just as she had every day for the past 13 years. But as she walked toward her wedding, something deep in her chest whispered a question that made her steps falter. What if there was another path? The thought was treasonous, dangerous, and completely futile. But it followed her down the corridor anyway, a shadow she couldn't dismiss. In 2 hours, Elena Morgan would cease to exist. In her place would stand Luna Damien Thorne, mate to the future Alpha, perfect political instrument. She just hoped the girl she was leaving behind wouldn't haunt her forever. Chapter 2: Shattered Vows. The grand ballroom of the Silver Crescent Pack House had been transformed into something from a dream. Ivory silk draped the towering stone walls, and thousands of white peonies cascaded from every surface, their fragrance thick enough to make Elena's head swim. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing patterns across the assembled guests. Representatives from 5 different packs, seated in carefully orchestrated sections that reflected decades of political maneuvering. Elena stood at the ballroom's entrance in her wedding gown, a masterpiece of ivory silk and Venetian lace that had cost more than most wolves earned in a year. The bodice hugged her figure perfectly, hand-sewn crystals catching the light with every breath. The train stretched behind her like a river of starlight, so long it required 2 young pack members to carry it. She felt beautiful and terrified in equal measure. The traditional wedding processional began, played by a chamber orchestra brought in from the city. Every head turned as she began her measured walk down the aisle. Damien waiting at the altar in a charcoal suit that emphasized his commanding presence. Alpha Thorne stood beside his son, chest swelled with pride, while Margaret watched from the front row with satisfaction gleaming in her ice-blue eyes. Representatives from the Iron Veil pack occupied the seats of honor, their Alpha nodding approvingly as Elena passed. The alliance would be sealed with her vows, a political victory Thorne had been pursuing for years. In the rear section, she caught sight of the Night Ridge delegation, 3 wolves in dark attire who radiated danger even while sitting perfectly still. Their Alpha, Kieran Ashford, watched her approach with an intensity that made her skin tingle with awareness. She forced herself to focus on Damien, on the future she was walking toward. He smiled as she drew closer. That practiced expression he wore at pack functions and business negotiations. Everything about this moment was perfect, exactly as it should be. Halfway down the aisle, Elena stumbled slightly on her train. A minor thing, barely noticeable. But Damien's smile faltered for just an instant. She saw something in his eyes. Irritation, perhaps disappointment. It vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. But the seed of doubt it planted began to grow. Elder Crawford waited at the altar, the pack's spiritual leader whose authority stretched back 4 generations. His weathered hands held the ceremonial binding cord, wolf hair woven with silver threads that would symbolically unite their souls. Behind him, the full moon shone through stained glass windows, bathing everything in ethereal silver light. Beloved pack, Elder Crawford began, his voice carrying across the hall without effort. We gather tonight under the blessing of the moon goddess to witness the sacred union of Damien Thorne and Elena Morgan. The formal words washed over her as Elena took her place beside Damien. His hand was warm when he took hers, steady and certain. She tried to find comfort in that steadiness, in the certainty of what came next. Damien Thorne, Elder Crawford continued, do you take this woman as your mate, to honor and protect, to cherish and defend, for as long as the moon shall rise? Damien's response should have been immediate, automatic. Instead, he hesitated, just for a heartbeat, but long enough for whispers to start in the back rows. Long enough for Elena's stomach to clench with sudden dread. Aye! Damien's voice carried clearly in the hushed hall. He looked at Elena, then at his father, then back at her. Something cold and calculating had replaced the warmth in his steel-gray eyes. I need to say something first. Elder Crawford frowned. This wasn't part of the ceremony. Wasn't in any tradition Elena knew. Around them, the assembled guests leaned forward, sensing drama unfolding. Damien. Alpha Thorne's voice held a warning note. But Damien had already made his decision. He dropped Elena's hand and took a step back, creating distance that felt like a chasm opening between them. I cannot take Elena as my mate, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. She has no true blood connection to this pack. She's an orphan we accepted out of compassion, nothing more. The words hit Elena like physical blows. Around her, the wedding guests erupted in shocked murmurs. But she couldn't process anything beyond Damien's next terrible words. The Iron Veil alliance has been secured through different channels, he continued, his tone businesslike, as if he were discussing trade agreements rather than destroying her life. I will be mating with Alpha Iron's daughter instead. She carries true bloodlines, true strength. He looked at her with something that might have been pity. Elena is not worthy of becoming Luna of this pack. The grand ballroom spun around her. 13 years of believing she belonged here, of thinking she had earned her place through loyalty and dedication, crumbled in an instant. The wedding dress that had made her feel like royalty now felt like a costume. A mockery of dreams she'd been foolish enough to believe could come true. Alpha Thorne stepped forward, and for a wild moment, Elena thought he might defend her, might argue with his son's devastating pronouncement. Instead, he nodded slowly. Damien speaks wisely, Thorne said, his voice carrying across the stunned hall. True leadership requires difficult decisions. The Silver Crescent pack will be strengthened by this choice. Betrayal crashed over her in waves. Not just Damien, but Thorne too. The man who had called her daughter, who had promised her a home, who had raised her for this exact moment. Only to reveal it had all been an elaborate lie. Cameras flashed as pack photographers captured her humiliation for posterity. The wedding that was supposed to be her triumph had become her public destruction. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, some sympathetic, others coldly evaluating, all of them witnesses to her shame. Elena turned and ran. The wedding dress made it difficult, the long train catching on chairs and flower arrangements as she fled down the aisle. Behind her, voices rose in confusion and speculation, but she couldn't stop to care what they were saying. The great doors seemed impossibly far away, but she finally reached them and burst through into the cool night air. She made it to the gardens before her legs gave out. Sinking onto a stone bench beside the reflecting pool, she buried her face in her hands and tried to breathe through the crushing weight in her chest. Everything she'd believed about her life, her future, her worth, all of it had been stripped away in less than 5 minutes. That was quite a spectacle. The voice was deep, unfamiliar, touched with an accent she couldn't place. Elena looked up to find a man standing in the shadows between 2 oak trees, moonlight catching the silver threads in his black hair. He was tall, probably 6'5", with the kind of lean muscle that spoke of lethal grace rather than showy strength. His dark eyes held an intelligence that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. Kieran Ashford, Alpha of the Night Ridge Pack, Silver Crescent's greatest rival, and definitely not someone she should be talking to while wearing a wedding dress and tear-streaked makeup. I'm sorry, she managed, trying to stand. I should return inside. I shouldn't be. Shouldn't be what? Breathing? Existing? Taking up space. His voice held an edge of anger that confused her. That display in there was designed to break you. Are you going to let it work? The question caught her off guard. I don't understand. Kieran stepped closer and she caught his scent, cedar and leather and something wild that made her wolf stir restlessly. Your former fiancé just announced to 5 packs that you're worthless. Your alpha, the man who raised you, agreed. They humiliated you in front of everyone who matters in your world. His dark eyes held hers steadily. What are you going to do about it? Before she could answer, he moved with supernatural speed. One moment he was 3 feet away. The next, his hand was on her neck, thumb pressing against her pulse point. She should have been terrified, should have screamed for help. Instead, she felt a strange sense of rightness, as if some missing piece of herself had finally clicked into place. You belong to me now, Kieran said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to resonate in her bones. Then his canines extended, and he bit down on the junction of her neck and shoulder, marking her as his mate in front of anyone who might be watching from the pack house windows. The claiming bite sent fire through her veins, a connection forming that was nothing like the tepid affection she'd expected with Damien. This was wild, consuming, dangerous, and completely beyond her control. When he pulled back, his mark was already healing on her neck. A permanent brand that would tell every supernatural creature exactly who she belonged to now. Welcome to Night Ridge, Kieran said, offering her his hand. Behind them, shouts erupted from the pack house as someone discovered what had just happened. In minutes, this garden would be full of angry silver crescent wolves demanding explanations she didn't have. Elena looked at the hand extended toward her, then back at the life she was leaving behind. There was no real choice to make. Damien and Thorn had made that clear. She took Kieran's hand and let him lead her into the darkness. The wedding dress she'd never get to wear properly trailing behind her like a ghost of the future she'd lost. In the distance, wolves began to howl. Chapter 3. Gilded Captivity. The Night Ridge stronghold rose from the cliffside like something carved from shadow and stone. Obsidian walls stretched toward the star-filled sky, broken by tall windows that glowed with warm light. Ancient pine trees pressed close against the outer walls, their branches scraping against stone with sounds like whispered secrets. Elena pulled the fur-lined cloak Kieran had given her tighter around her shoulders, trying to hide the wedding dress that now felt like a mockery of everything she'd thought her life would be. The claiming mark on her neck throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder that her world had irrevocably changed in the span of an hour. Impressive, isn't it? Kieran's voice held notes of pride as he guided her through the main gate. My great-great-grandfather built the original structure 4 centuries ago. Every generation has added to it, strengthened it. Guards nodded respectfully as they passed, their faces carefully neutral as they took in the sight of their alpha escorting a woman in a wedding dress through their territory. Elena caught fragments of whispered conversations. Silver Crescent, claiming, war. But Kieran's presence kept anyone from staring too openly. The Great Hall was a study in controlled strength. Massive fireplaces cast dancing shadows across walls lined with weapons and tapestries depicting Night Ridge's violent history. Pack members moved with the fluid grace of predators, every interaction speaking to a hierarchy built on respect rather than fear. Lydia, Kieran called to a young woman arranging herbs near the main staircase. Please prepare the blue guest suite for our visitor. The woman, barely 19 with the quick movements of an Omega, curtsied slightly. Of course, Alpha. Should I inform Beta Gareth of the new arrival? I'll handle Gareth myself. Kieran's tone suggested that conversation wouldn't be entirely pleasant. Make sure our guest has everything she needs. Clothing, food, whatever she requires. As Lydia hurried away, Elena found her voice. Guest, is that what I am? Kieran studied her with those unsettling dark eyes. What would you prefer to be called? Prisoner sounds harsh considering you came willingly. Maid is premature given the circumstances. He gestured toward the staircase. Guest seems appropriate for now. The blue guest suite was beautiful in a way that made Elena's chest ache. Sapphire silk curtains framed windows that looked out over the cliffs, and a fire crackled cheerfully in an ornate fireplace. The bed was large enough for 3 people, piled high with furs that looked incredibly soft. It was luxury beyond anything she'd known at Silver Crescent, and it felt like the most elegant prison cell in the world. Why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. Why did you claim me? You don't know anything about me. Kieran moved to the window, his profile sharp against the starlight. I know enough. I know Damien Thorn is a fool who discarded something valuable because he lacks the vision to see what he had. I know your alpha raised you for 13 years only to publicly humiliate you when it served his political purposes. He turned to face her. And I know you're stronger than they gave you credit for, or you wouldn't have survived this long in that environment. You're wrong. The words came out bitter, hollow. I'm exactly what Damien said. An orphan with no bloodline, no power, no real value to anyone. Are you? Kieran's voice held challenge. Then explain how you identified the weakness in our perimeter defenses during your walk through the courtyard. Elena blinked, startled. I don't know what you mean. You were cataloging defensive positions from the moment we entered the gates. Your eyes tracked guard rotations, noted sight lines, identified potential escape routes. His smile held sharp approval. That's not the behavior of someone worthless, Elena. That's the instinct of a strategist. The observation sent chills down her spine because it was true. Even in her emotional turmoil, her mind had automatically assessed the stronghold's layout, noted potential vulnerabilities. It was a habit she'd developed during childhood when understanding pack dynamics had been crucial to survival. I just noticed things, she said weakly. Exactly. Kieran moved closer, and she caught that wild scent again. Cedar and leather and something dangerous that made her pulse quicken. Your former pack wasted your potential because they were too focused on bloodlines and politics to see what they actually had. A mind like yours shouldn't be ornamental. Before she could respond, someone knocked sharply on the door. Kieran opened it to reveal a man who radiated authority despite being shorter than his alpha. Silver streaked his dark hair and scars crisscrossed his hands. The marks of a warrior who'd survived too many battles to count. Gareth, Kieran said by way of introduction. My beta. Gareth, this is Elena. Gareth's green eyes swept over her wedding dress with obvious disapproval. The Silver Crescent delegation departed 15 minutes ago. Thorn was displeased. I imagine he was. Kieran's tone suggested he found Thorn's displeasure amusing rather than concerning. Any threats? The usual bluster about consequences and retaliation. Nothing we haven't heard before. Gareth's attention returned to Elena. Are you planning to explain why you've brought an enemy pack member into our territory? The word enemy hit like a slap. Elena stepped backward, suddenly aware of how precarious her position was. She was alone in hostile territory, wearing clothes that marked her as Thorn's discarded property. Protected only by the whim of an alpha she didn't understand. She's under my protection, Kieran said simply. That makes her pack now. Does it? Gareth's skepticism was clear. Or does it make her a liability? Thorn raised her, trained her. How do we know this isn't some elaborate deception? Because, Kieran said with patience that somehow sounded more dangerous than anger. Thorn just publicly disowned her in front of 5 packs. Whatever use he might have had for her ended the moment Damien rejected their mating bond. The two men stared at each other in a silent battle of wills that Elena didn't fully understand. Finally, Gareth nodded curtly. I'll post guards. Discreet ones. His gaze flicked to Elena again. No offense intended, but trust must be earned here. After he left, silence stretched between them. Elena sank onto the edge of the massive bed, suddenly exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the evening. Everything she'd believed about her life had been stripped away in the space of hours, replaced by uncertainties that made her head spin. He's right to be suspicious, she said quietly. You don't know me. You don't know what I might do, what I might report back to Thorn. Kieran moved to the fireplace, resting one hand against the mantel. Firelight played across his features, highlighting the sharp cheekbones and the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. Do you want to go back to them? The question should have been easy to answer. Thorn had given her a home when she'd had nothing. The Silver Crescent pack was all she'd ever known. But when she tried to picture walking back into that pack house, facing Damien's indifferent contempt and Thorn's calculated manipulation, her stomach twisted with revulsion. No, she whispered. There's nothing for me there anymore. Then we understand each other. Kieran straightened, his expression businesslike. You'll stay here while we determine what comes next. You're free to move about the stronghold, but don't leave the walls without an escort. The cliffs can be dangerous for those who don't know them. He moved toward the door, then paused. Elena, that dress is beautiful, but you might be more comfortable in something less formal. Lydia will bring you clothes in the morning. After he left, Elena stood alone in the elegant room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a pack that wasn't hers. Through the windows, she could see lights twinkling in the valley below, other territories stretching into the darkness. She touched the claiming mark on her neck, still tender from Kieran's bite. The connection between them hummed beneath her skin, foreign and overwhelming. She didn't understand what he wanted from her, why he'd risk political consequences to claim a discarded bride from a rival pack. But for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen potential instead of obligation. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely beyond her control. Moving to the window, she pressed her palm against the cool glass and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Behind her, the wedding dress rustled with each breath, a reminder of the life she'd lost and the uncertain future she'd gained. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their voices carrying messages she couldn't yet understand. But she was learning. Chapter 4. Proving Ground. For days had passed since Elena's arrival at Night Ridge, and she was slowly learning the rhythm of her new life. The practical clothes Lydia had brought, dark jeans, wool sweaters, sturdy boots, felt strange after years of the delicate dresses Thorn had preferred his daughter to wear. But they allowed her to move freely through the stronghold, observing the intricate workings of a pack that operated on entirely different principles than Silver Crescent. Where Thorn's pack functioned through fear and rigid hierarchy, Night Ridge thrived on earned respect and genuine loyalty. Pack members challenged each other during training without worry of punishment. Conversations flowed freely across rank lines. Most surprising of all, Kieran was accessible to anyone who needed his attention, not hidden behind layers of bureaucracy like Thorn. "You're overthinking again," Gareth observed, finding her in the library where she'd spent most of her mornings. The beta had maintained professional distance since her arrival, but his outright hostility had mellowed into cautious acceptance. Elena looked up from the historical text she'd been reading, a chronicle of territorial disputes dating back 3 centuries. "Just trying to understand how things work here. And what have you concluded?" He settled into the chair across from her, genuinely curious. "Your alpha leads differently than mine did." She chose her words carefully, aware that criticism of Thorn might sound like manipulation. "There's less performance, more substance." Gareth's weathered face creased with something that might have been approval. "Kieran earned his position through merit, not birthright. Makes a difference in how he views leadership." Before Elena could respond, rapid footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. A young warrior burst through the library doors, his face tight with urgency. "Beta Gareth, we have a situation. The Western Patrol is 4 hours overdue and we've lost radio contact." Elena's blood chilled. She'd learned enough about Night Ridge's operations to know their patrols ran with military precision. For hours late meant something had gone seriously wrong. Gareth was on his feet instantly. "How many?" 5 wolves, including patrol leader Sienna Cross. They were checking the disputed border area near Raven's Canyon. "Rogues." Gareth's voice had gone hard, tactical. "Unknown. Alpha Kieran is assembling a search team now." As the warrior hurried away, Elena found herself speaking without conscious thought. "Don't send them through the Eastern Pass." Both men turned to stare at her. Gareth's expression was carefully neutral, but she could sense his skepticism. "I'm sorry," she backtracked quickly. "I shouldn't have." "No," Gareth interrupted. "Explain." Elena's mind raced, pulling together fragments of information from the historical texts, conversations she'd overheard, and her own observations of the territory. "If I were planning an ambush in that area, I'd position my forces to funnel rescue attempts through predictable routes. The Eastern Pass is obvious. It's where anyone would expect help to come from. And where would you send a rescue team?" Gareth's tone had shifted from skeptical to interested. "The Northern Ridge. It's harder terrain, but it offers multiple escape routes if things go wrong. Plus, if the patrol is injured and hiding, they'd likely move toward higher ground for better visibility." Gareth studied her for a long moment. "Come with me." The war room buzzed with controlled urgency. Maps covered every surface, marked with colored pins denoting patrol routes, territorial boundaries, and potential threats. Kieran stood at the center of it all, his dark hair pulled back as he coordinated search efforts with the focused intensity of a predator tracking prey. "Alpha," Gareth called. "Elena has a tactical suggestion." Every conversation in the room stopped. A dozen pairs of eyes turned toward her, measuring, evaluating. Elena's instinct was to shrink back, to apologize for presuming to offer input. Instead, she forced herself to step forward. "Show me," Kieran said simply. Elena moved to the large topographical map dominating the center table. Her finger traced the route the missing patrol would have taken. They were checking this sector near the disputed boundary. If someone wanted to ambush a Night Ridge patrol, this area offers good cover and multiple escape routes. She indicated a narrow canyon that cut through the cliffs. But if they were planning something larger, maybe hoping to draw in a rescue team, they'd want to control the battlefield. Kieran leaned closer, his attention completely focused on her analysis. Go on. The Eastern Pass is the obvious rescue route. It's fast, direct, but it's also a bottleneck. Easy to monitor, easier to trap. Her finger moved to trace an alternative path. The northern ridge is harder terrain, but it gives you options. If the patrol managed to escape the initial ambush, that's where they'd go. That route would take twice as long. One of the warriors objected. Yes, Elena agreed. But it would get your people there alive. Silence settled over the room as Kieran studied the map. When he finally looked up, his dark eyes held something she couldn't quite identify. Sienna is smart, he said slowly. If she was ambushed and managed to get away, she'd think tactically. High ground, multiple exits, positions that favored defense over attack. He looked at Elena directly. You think like she does. It wasn't quite a compliment, but it felt like recognition. For the first time since her arrival, she'd contributed something valuable instead of simply existing as Kieran's mysterious acquisition. Take the northern ridge, Kieran decided. Full team, but spread formation. If this is an ambush, don't give them a concentrated target. As the warriors hurried to prepare, Elena expected to be dismissed. Instead, Kieran turned to her. I want you with the communications team. Your tactical insight might be useful if we encounter complications. Alpha, Gareth interjected carefully. Is that wise? She's untested in field conditions. She'll be safely positioned with our tech team, well away from any fighting. Kieran's tone brooked no argument. But her perspective has already proven valuable. An hour later, Elena found herself crouched behind a rocky outcropping halfway up the northern ridge, a radio headset connecting her to teams spread across the cliffside. The communications specialist, a quiet beta named Riley, had explained the basics of field coordination, but mostly she was there to observe and advise if needed. Team 3 to base, crackled through the radio. We have visual on the patrol. 5 wolves, all alive but injured. They're holed up in a cave system about 3 kilometers from your position. Relief flooded through Elena. They were alive. Any sign of hostiles? Kieran's voice came through clearly. Negative. Looks like they fought off the initial attack and managed to retreat. Sienna is conscious and giving us tactical details now. As the rescue unfolded smoothly, exactly as Elena's analysis had predicted, she felt something shift inside her chest. For years at Silver Crescent, she'd been ornamental. Pretty, polite, useful for sealing political alliances, but not much else. Here, her thoughts mattered. Her insights had potentially saved lives. Solid work, Riley said quietly as they packed up the communications equipment. Your route suggestion was spot on. The words were simple, professional, but they hit Elena with surprising force. When was the last time anyone at Silver Crescent had acknowledged her contributions? When had Damien or Thorne ever asked for her opinion on anything more significant than flower arrangements? By the time they returned to the stronghold, word had spread about the successful rescue. Pack members nodded respectfully as she passed, no longer seeing her as simply their alpha's mysterious guest. She'd proven herself useful, and in a pack that valued competence above bloodline, that mattered. Elena. Kieran appeared at her elbow as she headed toward the main staircase. Walk with me. They moved through the stronghold in comfortable silence, eventually emerging onto a balcony that overlooked the valley. The setting sun painted the cliffs in shades of gold and crimson, and the beauty of it made her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. You saved 5 lives today, Kieran said finally. I just looked at a map and made suggestions. Your people did the real work. Leadership isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about making the right decisions with the information available. He turned to study her profile. You have good instincts. The praise warmed her more than it should have. Thorne never thought so. Thorne is a politician who sees only political uses for the people around him. He looked at you and saw a marriage alliance, a way to secure loyalty through obligation. Kieran's voice held quiet anger. He never bothered to discover what you were actually capable of. The words stirred something deep in her chest. A hunger she'd buried so completely she'd forgotten it existed. The desire to be valued for her mind, her contributions, her potential. Not just her willingness to be shaped into whatever role someone else needed her to fill. What do you see when you look at me? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Kieran's dark eyes held hers steadily. I see someone who's been underestimated her entire life. Someone with sharp instincts and tactical intelligence that could be extraordinary with proper development. He paused. And I see someone who's never been given the chance to discover what she's truly capable of. The claiming mark on her neck pulsed with warmth, reminding her of the connection that bound them together. It was still foreign, still overwhelming, but it no longer felt like a cage. Instead, it felt like possibility. What happens now? She asked. Now you decide what you want your life to look like, Kieran replied. You're not Thorne's political pawn anymore. You're not Damien's discarded bride. You're free to become whoever you choose to be. As the last light faded from the cliffs, Elena considered the prospect of freedom. Real freedom, not the illusion of choice she'd lived with at Silver Crescent. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. For the first time in her life, the future felt like something she might actually help create. Chapter 5, Buried Truths. 3 weeks had passed since the successful rescue mission, and Elena had settled into an unexpected rhythm at Night Ridge. Her mornings were spent in the archives, poring over territorial histories and treaty documents that stretched back centuries. Her afternoons involved tactical discussions with Gareth and the other senior pack members, her insights increasingly valued and sought after. It was during one of these research sessions that she found the file that would change everything. The leather portfolio was wedged behind a row of ceremonial texts, as if someone had hidden it deliberately. The label written in fading ink simply read, Morgan Investigation Classified. Elena's breath caught. She hadn't seen her family name written anywhere in over 13 years. With trembling fingers, she opened the portfolio. The first document was an incident report dated 14 years ago, detailing the rogue attack that had killed her parents. But as she read further, discrepancies began to emerge. The attack patterns described didn't match typical rogue behavior. The timeline of events had gaps that didn't make sense. Most damning of all, there were witness statements that had been sealed by order of Alpha Thorne himself. Her father, Daniel Morgan, had been investigating unusual pack member deaths in the months before his murder. Pack members who had all opposed Thorne's increasingly authoritarian leadership style. The final document in the file was a half-finished report in her father's handwriting, detailing his suspicions about corruption within the pack's inner circle. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Her parents hadn't died in a random attack. They'd been murdered to silence her father's investigation. Elena, Kieran's voice came from the archive doorway. Riley said you'd been here for hours without. He stopped, taking in her pale face and shaking hands. What did you find? She couldn't speak, couldn't form words around the crushing weight in her chest. Instead, she handed him the portfolio and watched his expression darken as he read. Bastard, he breathed. Thorne had your parents killed. Not just Thorne. Elena's voice came out broken. She pointed to a signature on one of the witness statements. Margaret, my stepmother was involved. She helped plan it. The betrayal cut deeper than Damien's rejection, deeper than Thorne's manipulation. Margaret had held her while she cried for her murdered parents, had raised her with what she'd believed was love, had been the only mother figure she'd thought she had left, all while knowing she'd helped orchestrate their deaths. Kieran moved to her side, his presence solid and grounding. How long have you been carrying suspicions about this? I never suspected anything, Elena admitted. I was 10 years old when it happened. Thorne and Margaret told me rogues killed them, and I believed it. Why wouldn't I? They took me in, gave me a home. Her laugh came out bitter, hollow. God, I spent 13 years grateful to the people who murdered my family. They counted on that gratitude, Kieran said quietly. Children who feel indebted are easier to control, easier to manipulate into whatever role you need them to fill. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Thorne had eliminated her father to protect his corrupt dealings, then taken her in to maintain the illusion of benevolence. The arranged marriage to Damien hadn't been about securing alliances. It had been about permanently binding the last Morgan to the Thorne family, ensuring her silence forever. There's more, Kieran said grimly, still reading through the documents. Your father wasn't just investigating pack member deaths. He discovered evidence of Thorne selling information to rival packs, including details about our patrol routes and defensive positions. Elena's blood turned to ice. That's treason. High treason. The kind that starts wars and gets innocent wolves killed. Kieran's jaw was tight with controlled fury. Some of these intelligence leaks happened just before major conflicts. Good wolves died because of Thorne's betrayals. The room spun around her as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Her father had died trying to expose Thorne's crimes. Her mother had died simply for being married to an honest wolf. And she'd spent her entire life believing her guardians were heroes instead of murderers. "I have to go back," she said suddenly, lurching to her feet. "I have to confront them, make them pay for what they did." "No." Kieran's voice was firm. "That's exactly what they'd expect. You show up at Silver Crescent making accusations. They'll claim you're a bitter ex-member spreading lies. Worse, they might decide you're too dangerous to leave alive. So what? I do nothing. Let them get away with murder." "You do nothing reckless," Kieran corrected. "This evidence is 14 years old. We need to build a case that will hold up before the Territorial Council. Something that will bring real justice instead of just revenge." Before Elena could respond, urgent knocking echoed through the archives. Gareth appeared in the doorway, his face grim with the kind of expression that preceded bad news. "Alpha, we have a problem. Margaret Morgan is here under a peace banner, requesting immediate audience. She claims to be negotiating for Elena's safe return to Silver Crescent." The portfolio slipped from Elena's numb fingers, documents scattering across the floor. After 13 years of lies, Margaret had come to collect her wayward stepdaughter. The timing felt too convenient, too calculated. "She knows," Elena whispered. "Somehow she knows we found the evidence." Kieran was already moving, gathering the scattered documents with efficient precision. "Gareth, how long until the meeting?" 20 minutes. She's waiting in the formal reception hall with 2 guards. "Perfect." Kieran's smile held no warmth whatsoever. "That gives us time to prepare a proper welcome." "Alpha," Gareth said carefully. "If this is about territorial violations or pack politics, we need to handle it diplomatically. We can't afford to provoke Thorne into open warfare over one pack member." "This isn't about pack politics," Kieran replied, his voice deadly quiet. "It's about murder. And I have no intention of being diplomatic with child killers." Elena felt the world tilt around her. In 20 minutes, she would face the woman who had helped murder her parents, who had spent 13 years lying to her face, who had come here to drag her back to Silver Crescent for reasons that couldn't possibly be good. The claiming mark on her neck pulsed with heat. And through their bond, she felt Kieran's rage on her behalf, protective, fierce, and completely unwavering. For the first time since finding the portfolio, she didn't feel alone with the weight of this revelation. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "I need you to be smart," Kieran said. "Let her talk first. Let her reveal why she's really here. Don't give away what we know until we understand her game. And if she tries to take me by force?" Kieran's eyes went completely black, his wolf rising close to the surface. "She won't." The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring. But Elena found herself thinking about the wider implications of this confrontation. If Margaret suspected they had evidence of Thorne's crimes, she wouldn't have come alone or unprepared. This meeting could be the opening move in something much larger and more dangerous. "Gareth," Kieran continued, "I want additional security in the hall, but keep them discreet. If this goes bad, I don't want Margaret thinking we were planning trouble." "Already handled," Gareth replied. "But Alpha, are you sure about bringing Elena to this meeting? If Margaret realizes we know about the murders, then we deal with the consequences," Kieran said simply. "Elena deserves to face the woman who destroyed her family, and Margaret deserves to explain herself." As they prepared to leave the archives, Elena caught sight of her reflection in a darkened window. The frightened, grateful girl who had arrived at Night Ridge 4 weeks ago was gone. In her place stood someone harder, sharper, tempered by betrayal and strengthened by truth. She'd spent her entire life being shaped by other people's lies and agendas. But Thorne and Margaret had made one crucial mistake. They'd taught her to survive in a world of deception and manipulation. Now she was going to use those skills against them. The claiming mark pulsed again, and she felt Kieran's steady presence through their bond. Whatever game Margaret was playing, whatever trap she'd walked into by coming here, Elena wouldn't face it alone. For the first time in her life, she had someone who valued her enough to fight for her. And she was about to discover exactly how dangerous that made her. "Let's go," she said, squaring her shoulders. "It's time for some honest conversation." Kieran's smile was sharp as a blade. "I was hoping you'd say that." The portfolio tucked safely under his arm, They headed toward a confrontation that would determine not just Elena's future, but the fate of both their packs. In the reception hall, Margaret waited with the patience of a predator who believed she'd already won. She was about to learn otherwise. Chapter 6, Unmasked. The formal reception hall at Night Ridge had been designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings stretched toward shadow, and ancestral portraits lined the walls. Generations of Ashford alphas whose painted eyes seemed to judge anyone who dared enter their domain. Massive windows overlooked the valley below, but heavy curtains had been drawn, leaving only firelight to illuminate the room. Margaret Morgan sat in the center of it all like a spider in an elegant web. She wore a charcoal gray suit that emphasized her authority as second in command. Her platinum blonde hair pulled back in that severe style that had intimidated Elena throughout her childhood. 2 silver crescent guards flanked her chair, their postures alert but respectful of the peace banner that protected this meeting. When Elena entered beside Kieran, Margaret's ice-blue eyes widened with what might have been genuine relief. "Elena, darling." Margaret rose smoothly, arms extended as if for an embrace. "Thank the moon goddess. You're safe. When we heard about the claiming about what that savage did to you." She shot Kieran a look of calculated hatred. "We've been so worried." The endearment hit Elena like a physical blow. How many times had Margaret called her darling while knowing she'd helped murder her parents? How many false embraces had she endured from the woman who'd orchestrated her family's destruction? "Margaret," Elena managed, her voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "I can imagine." Margaret's gaze swept over Elena's practical clothes, the way she stood close to Kieran's side, the claiming mark visible on her neck. "Alpha Thorn sent me to negotiate your return home. We know this claiming was forced, done without your consent. No one will hold you responsible for what happened under duress." Kieran spoke for the first time, his voice deceptively mild. "Interesting assumption, Beta Morgan. What makes you think the claiming was forced?" Margaret's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Please, Alpha Ashford." Elena was raised as Thorn's daughter. She's gentle, sheltered, completely unprepared for the harsh realities of cliff pack life. Obviously, you took advantage of her vulnerable state after that unfortunate scene at the wedding. Unfortunate scene? Elena's voice sharpened despite her efforts to stay calm. "Is that what you're calling it? Damien's public humiliation of me in front of 5 packs. Damien made a mistake," Margaret said smoothly. "Young wolves often act impulsively. Thorn has spoken with him extensively, and he's prepared to honor the original mating agreement. You can still be Luna of Silver Crescent, still have the life you were raised for." The audacity of it stole Elena's breath. They expected her to crawl back, to pretend the rejection had never happened, to mate with a man who'd called her worthless in front of hundreds of witnesses. More than that, they expected her to be grateful for the opportunity. "How generous of Damien to reconsider," Kieran said, his tone sharp with sarcasm. "And what does Thorn offer in return for this magnificent second chance?" "Full pardoning of your territorial violations," Margaret replied immediately. The claiming of a Silver Crescent Pack member without permission was an act of war. But Thorn is prepared to overlook it in the interest of peace. All we want is Elena's safe return. And if she chooses to stay? Margaret's mask slipped slightly, revealing the steel beneath. She won't. Elena is loyal to her family, to the pack that raised her. She understands duty and obligation. Don't you, darling? The question was loaded with years of conditioning, with the weight of guilt and manufactured gratitude that had shaped Elena's entire life. The old Elena would have nodded, would have apologized for causing trouble, would have packed her things and followed Margaret home like an obedient daughter. But the old Elena hadn't known the truth about her parents' deaths. "I do understand duty," Elena said quietly. "I understand it very well, which is why I need to ask you something, Margaret." Margaret's expression grew cautious. "Of course, darling. What is it?" Elena moved to stand directly in front of her stepmother, close enough to see the fine lines around those ice-blue eyes, close enough to smell the familiar perfume that had once meant safety and comfort. Now it made her stomach turn. "Why did you help Thorn murder my parents?" The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret went completely still, her face cycling through surprise, denial, and finally settling on cold calculation. The guards behind her shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons before catching themselves. "I don't know what you're talking about," Margaret said finally, but her voice had lost its warm maternal tone. "Your parents died in a rogue attack 14 years ago. You know that." Do I? Elena pulled the investigation portfolio from where Kieran had tucked it inside his jacket. Because according to my father's files, the only rogues in those woods were you and Thorne's assassins. Margaret's eyes fixed on the portfolio like a predator watching prey. Where did you get that? From the Night Ridge archives, where your friend Thorne stored it after he had my father killed. Elena opened the folder, pulling out the witness statement with Margaret's signature. Funny thing about evidence. It has a way of surviving even when the people it implicates think it's been buried forever. That's fabricated, Margaret stammered, but the color had drained from her face. Thorne would never sell intelligence to rival packs? Never order the death of his own beta to cover up treason? Never adopt the victim's daughter to maintain his image as a benevolent leader? Elena's voice grew stronger with each word. Because according to these files, he did all of that and more. The guards were looking between Elena and Margaret with growing confusion, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. Behind her, Elena felt Kieran's presence like a shield, his silence allowing her to confront her demons in her own way. Margaret stood abruptly, her composure cracking. Even if those allegations were true, and I'm not saying they are, what would you gain by pursuing them? Your parents are dead. Nothing will bring them back. You have a chance at a real life with Damien, at becoming Luna of a powerful pack. Why would you throw that away for revenge? This isn't about revenge, Elena said. It's about justice. About making sure no other children grow up believing their parents' killers are heroes. You ungrateful little. Margaret caught herself, glancing at the guards who were watching this exchange with obvious shock. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled but venomous. I raised you. I fed you, clothed you, loved you like my own daughter. And this is how you repay me. With wild accusations and conspiracy theories. You raised me to be compliant, Elena corrected. To never ask questions, never challenge authority, never demand more than what I was given. You raised me to be the perfect victim. Margaret's laugh was sharp, bitter. And what are you now? The maid of a cliff savage who claimed you like a piece of property? You think that's better than being Luna of Silver Crescent? Yes, Elena said without hesitation. Because he sees me as a partner, not a pawn. Because he values my mind, not just my usefulness. Because when I proved I could contribute something meaningful, he didn't try to diminish it or control it. She stepped closer, and Margaret actually took a step back. Most importantly, because he's never lied to me about who killed my family. The mask was completely gone now. The woman standing before Elena bore no resemblance to the loving stepmother who had comforted her through nightmares, who had taught her to braid her hair, who had been the only mother figure she'd ever known. This was a stranger wearing Margaret's face, cold and calculating and utterly without remorse. You have no idea what you're playing with, Margaret hissed. Thorne has connections you can't imagine. Power that reaches far beyond Silver Crescent. If you pursue this vendetta, you won't just destroy yourself. You'll destroy everyone in this pathetic cliff pack. Is that a threat, Beta Morgan? Kieran's voice cut through the tension like a blade. It's a reality, Margaret snapped, turning her venom on him. You think claiming one discarded bride makes you powerful? Thorne has been planning for this conversation since the day you stole her. Every move you've made, every decision you've taken, he's been 3 steps ahead. Before anyone could respond, one of the guards cleared his throat nervously. Beta Morgan, should we prepare to return to Silver Crescent? Margaret looked at him with something approaching pity. Oh, Marcus, you still think this was a rescue mission? The guard's hand went to his weapon as understanding dawned in his eyes. Beta. Thorne's orders were very specific, Margaret continued, her attention returning to Elena. Bring her home if possible. If not, she shrugged eloquently. The second guard was already moving, silver blade flashing in the firelight as he lunged toward Elena. But Kieran was faster, intercepting the attack with inhuman speed, his own claws extending as he drove the assassin backward. Chaos erupted in the reception hall. The first guard, Marcus, drew his weapon but seemed frozen by shock at Margaret's betrayal. Night Ridge warriors, who had been stationed discreetly around the room, moved to neutralize threats. But the close quarters made clean action difficult. Through it all, Margaret stood calmly in the center of the violence, watching Elena with those cold, ice-blue eyes. 13 years I spent molding you into the perfect weapon, she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather while wolves fought for their lives around them. Quiet, obedient, grateful. Do you know how disappointed Thorne was when Damien rejected you? All that careful conditioning wasted. Elena felt something shift deep inside her chest. The frightened girl who had always sought approval, who had swallowed every lie and smiled through every manipulation. That girl finally died. In her place stood a woman who had seen the face of evil, wearing the mask of love, and refused to be its victim any longer. "You're wrong," Elena said, her voice cutting through the sounds of combat. "You didn't create a weapon. You created someone who survived in spite of you. And now I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of monsters you and Thorn really are." Margaret's smile was sharp as broken glass. "We'll see about that, darling." The endearment, twisted with poison, was the last thing she said before Kieran's claws found her throat. Justice, Elena realized, sometimes wore the face of a claiming mate who refused to let anyone hurt what belonged to him. The silence that followed was final and absolute. Chapter 7, Reckoning. The aftermath of Margaret's death left the reception hall eerily quiet. Night Ridge warriors moved with practiced efficiency, securing the scene while medics tended to minor injuries from the brief but violent confrontation. The surviving Silver Crescent guard, Marcus, sat in restraints with the shell-shocked expression of a man whose entire worldview had crumbled in the space of minutes. Elena stood over her stepmother's body, feeling strangely hollow. She'd expected rage, grief, some cathartic release of emotion. Instead, there was only a cold sense of completion, as if a chapter of her life had finally closed. "Are you all right?" Kieran appeared at her side, his clothes torn but otherwise unharmed. The protective fury that had driven him to kill Margaret was banked now, replaced by concern for his mate. "I think so," Elena said honestly. "Is that wrong? Shouldn't I feel something more?" "You feel what you need to feel," he replied simply. "Margaret stopped being your family the moment she helped murder your parents. What happened here was justice, not murder." Gareth approached with a grim expression and a communication device in his hand. "Alpha, we've been monitoring Silver Crescent radio frequencies. Thorn has mobilized his entire pack. They're moving toward our borders. How long do we have?" 7 hours, maybe less. He's not waiting for Margaret's return. This was always meant to be the opening move in something larger. Elena felt the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. It was never about bringing me home. Margaret's mission was to confirm we had the evidence, then eliminate any witnesses who could testify against Thorn. "A false flag operation," Kieran agreed. "Attack our territory under the pretense of rescuing you. Kill everyone who knew the truth about his crimes, then claim we murdered his peace delegation." "Except now he doesn't have a peace delegation to point to," Gareth observed. "Just a dead beta and a guard who can testify to her attempting assassination." Before anyone could respond, Marcus lifted his head with obvious effort. "You don't understand," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thorn doesn't need proof for what he's planning. He's not just bringing Silver Crescent. He's assembled a coalition. 4 packs, maybe 5. They think you're building an army to threaten territorial stability." The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. "That's why he needed me eliminated. Not just to hide his crimes, but to prevent anyone from exposing the lies he's been spreading about Night Ridge." "What lies?" Kieran's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Marcus hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to his former pack and horror at what he'd discovered. Finally, he spoke. "He's been telling other alphas that you're planning territorial expansion, that the claiming of Elena was the first step in destabilizing the region. He has forged evidence. Communications that appear to be from you, discussing invasion plans." "Son of a," Gareth breathed. "He's not just covering up murder. He's trying to start a war that will eliminate Night Ridge entirely." The war room had been transformed into a command center that hummed with controlled urgency. Maps covered every surface, marked with troop movements and defensive positions. Senior pack members coordinated preparations with the kind of efficiency that spoke to years of training for exactly this scenario. But as Elena studied the tactical situation, her blood chilled. Even with their superior defensive position and intimate knowledge of the cliff terrain, they were vastly outnumbered. 500 wolves, she said aloud, her voice cutting through the strategic discussions. "Thorns brought 500 wolves against our 200. Our 212, Kieran corrected. "But you're right. The numbers aren't in our favor." "Numbers aren't everything," Gareth added, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. "We know this territory. We have better equipment, better training. And Thorn has the benefit of righteous fury," Elena countered. His wolves believe they're avenging a murdered peace delegation. They'll fight harder because they think they're the heroes. The room fell silent as the weight of their situation settled over everyone present. They were facing annihilation based on lies and forged evidence. And the truth would die with them if they failed to survive the next 24 hours. There has to be another way, Elena said suddenly. Some option that doesn't involve a massacre. Such as, Kieran's tone was patient, but she could feel his skepticism through their bond. We expose Thorn before the fighting starts. Show the coalition packs what he really is. Turn them against him instead of us. How? Gareth asked. They're 7 hours away, hyped up on Thorn's propaganda, and convinced we're the villains in this scenario. Elena moved to the large communication console that dominated one corner of the war room. What if we could broadcast the truth directly to them? Override their communications. Force them to hear Marcus testify about what really happened. That's, Gareth paused, considering the possibilities. Actually not impossible. We have the equipment to override military frequencies, but Thorn's people would shut us down within minutes. Minutes might be enough, Elena said, her mind racing through possibilities. Not to tell the whole story, but to plant enough doubt to fracture the coalition. Kieran studied her with those intense dark eyes. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Thorn spent 14 years building his reputation on lies. What happens when some of those lies get exposed in front of the wolves who trust him most? The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Technical teams worked to configure broadcasting equipment, while Elena and Marcus prepared testimony that would be devastating in its brevity and impact. Every minute counted. Too long and Thorn's forces would shut down the transmission. Too short, and they wouldn't convey enough truth to matter. As the enemy coalition approached Night Ridge's borders, Elena stood before the communications array with Marcus beside her. Through the windows, she could see their own warriors taking defensive positions, preparing for a battle that might never come if her gamble succeeded. You ready for this? She asked Marcus, who still looked shaken by the revelations about his former pack's leadership. I've served under Thorn for 9 years, he said quietly. I need to make sure good wolves don't die for his lies. The communication officer nodded to Elena. We're patched into their command frequencies. You'll be broadcasting directly to every wolf in that coalition force. Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her pack's survival resting on the next few minutes. This is Elena Morgan speaking from Night Ridge territory to the coalition forces approaching our borders. Static crackled across the line, but she could hear shouting in the background as Thorn's people tried to shut down the transmission. You've been told that Alpha Ashford claimed me by force, that Night Ridge is planning territorial expansion, that your invasion is necessary for regional stability. All of these are lies perpetrated by Alpha Thorn to hide his own crimes. 14 years ago, Thorn ordered the murder of my parents to prevent exposure of his treasonous activities. My father, Daniel Morgan, discovered evidence that Thorn was selling pack intelligence to rival territories. When he tried to bring this information to light, Thorn had him killed and staged the scene to look like a rogue attack. More shouting from the coalition frequencies, but the transmission was holding. The woman you knew as Beta Margaret Morgan helped plan my parents' deaths, then spent 13 years raising me as Thorn's grateful ward. Tonight, she came to Night Ridge under a peace banner with orders to assassinate anyone who could testify to Thorn's crimes. Marcus stepped forward, his voice clear and strong. I am Marcus Chun, Silver Crescent Pack Guard. I witnessed Beta Morgan attempt assassination under direct orders from Alpha Thorn. Everything Elena Morgan has said is true. We came here to commit murder, not rescue a kidnapped pack member. The transmission cut out abruptly, but not before they heard chaos erupting across multiple frequencies. Arguments, demands for explanations, the sound of a coalition fracturing under the weight of unexpected truth. Now we wait, Kieran said, moving to Elena's side. They didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, scouts reported that 3 of the 5 coalition packs had withdrawn from the advance, their alphas demanding answers from Thorn that he couldn't provide. The remaining force was still formidable, but no longer overwhelming. More importantly, Thorn's credibility was in ruins. The other territorial leaders who had trusted his word were now questioning everything he'd told them, creating political problems that would outlast any military confrontation. It's working, Gareth reported as updates continued to flow in. The Iron Veil Pack has officially withdrawn support. Their alpha is calling for a territorial council investigation into Thorn's activities. By dawn, Thorne's grand coalition had been reduced to his own pack, and a handful of loyalists who either didn't believe the revelations or didn't care. The invasion that should have overwhelmed Night Ridge had become a politically disastrous rout that left Thorne exposed and friendless. "He'll still fight," Elena said as they watched the sunrise paint the cliffs gold. "He has nothing left to lose now." "Let him come," Kieran replied. "The truth is out. Whatever happens next, history will remember who the real monster was." Standing on the stronghold walls beside the mate who had given her the strength to face her demons, Elena felt something she'd never experienced before: complete certainty in her own worth. She was no longer Thorne's grateful ward or Damien's rejected bride. She was a strategist, a survivor, and a woman who had looked evil in the face and refused to blink. Whatever came next, she would meet it as herself, finally, fully, and without apology. The claiming mark on her neck pulsed with warmth, and through their bond, she felt Kieran's fierce pride in what she'd accomplished. Together, they watched the sun rise on their new world. Chapter 8: New Foundations. 7 months had passed since the coalition's collapse, and the Territorial Council's investigation had been thorough and devastating. Thorne faced charges of treason, murder, and conspiracy that would likely result in permanent exile or execution. Damien had been stripped of his inheritance, left to face the consequences of his father's crimes with nothing but his own inadequate character to sustain him. The Silver Crescent Pack, under new leadership, had formally apologized to Night Ridge and offered reparations that Kieran had graciously accepted. More importantly, they had provided additional testimony that filled in the remaining gaps in the case against Thorne. Elena stood in what had once been the archives where she discovered the truth about her parents' murders. Now it served as her official office, complete with communication equipment that connected her to territorial councils across the region. Her role as Night Ridge's diplomatic liaison had evolved naturally from her analytical skills and her unique understanding of interpack politics. "The Stonebrook Pack wants to renegotiate their border agreements," she told Kieran as he entered with 2 cups of coffee, a morning ritual they'd developed over the winter months. Apparently, Thorne had been feeding them false information about our territorial claims for years. "More cleanup from his legacy of lies," Kieran observed, settling into the chair across from her desk. "How many does that make?" 17 separate diplomatic issues that can be traced back to Thorne's manipulations. It's remarkable how much damage one corrupt alpha can do over 14 years. Elena accepted her coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "Though I have to admit, I'm enjoying the work of rebuilding these relationships." "You're excellent at it," Kieran said, and the simple statement carried weight beyond its words. "The other territorial leaders respect you. Trust your judgment. That's not something that can be manufactured or inherited. It has to be earned." The claiming mark on her neck had long since healed into a permanent reminder of how dramatically her life had changed. But more than that, it had become a symbol of partnership rather than possession. She and Kieran worked together as equals, their different strengths complementing each other in ways that made both of them more effective leaders. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Riley, the communication specialist, entered with a tablet displaying message logs. "Luna, you have several priority communications. The Territorial Council wants your input on new intelligence sharing protocols, and there's a request from the Iron Veil Pack for mediation assistance with a boundary dispute." Luna. The title still sent a thrill through her, not because of its prestige, but because she'd earned it through her actions rather than marriage or birthright. The pack members who called her Luna did so with genuine respect, having seen her prove herself during the crisis with Thorne. "Schedule the Territorial Council meeting for next week," Elena decided. "And for Iron Veil, I'll review their dispute materials and get back to them within 48 hours. After Riley left, Kieran moved around the desk to stand behind her chair, his hands resting on her shoulders. "You realize you're working too hard again," says the alpha who was up until midnight reviewing security protocols, Elena countered, leaning back against his chest. The comfortable intimacy of the gesture spoke to how their relationship had deepened beyond the claiming bond into genuine partnership and love. "Fair point," he conceded, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I have something that might convince you to take a break." "Oh, what's that?" Instead of answering, he moved to the window overlooking the courtyard. "Look." Elena joined him at the window and gasped. Below, Pack members had gathered in celebration around a young couple who stood beside the fountain. The same fountain where she'd first encountered Kieran on the worst night of her life. The bride wore a simple but elegant dress of pale lavender silk, while her mate stood beside her with obvious adoration. Sarah Martinez and David Chun, Kieran explained. Marcus's younger brother and one of our engineering specialists. They wanted to have their mating ceremony here at Night Ridge because they said our pack represents the possibility of building something new from the ruins of the past. The words hit Elena unexpectedly hard. She watched the young couple exchange vows of their own choosing, surrounded by pack members who celebrated their love without reservation or political calculation. It was everything her own wedding to Damien should have been and wasn't. "Are you all right?" Kieran's voice held concern. "More than all right," Elena said softly. "I was just thinking about how different my life might have been if I'd never found the courage to question what I was told, to demand more than what I was offered." "You always had that courage," Kieran said firmly. "Thorne and Margaret just spent years convincing you to suppress it. But it was always there, waiting for the right moment to emerge." Below them, the ceremony concluded with cheers and applause. Sarah and David were surrounded by well-wishers, their faces bright with the kind of joy that came from choosing each other freely. "I want that," Elena said suddenly. Kieran went very still behind her. "Want what?" "A real ceremony. Not the political theater Thorne planned. Not the claiming that happened in crisis. A celebration of what we've built together. What we choose to be to each other." When she turned to face him, his dark eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "Are you asking me to marry you, Luna Elena Ashford?" The name sent warmth flooding through her chest. She'd been thinking of herself as Elena Ashford for months, but hearing it spoken aloud by the man she loved made it feel official in a way that legal documents couldn't match. "I'm asking if you want to celebrate what we already are," she corrected. "Partners, mates, equals who chose each other and built something stronger together than either of us could manage alone." His answer came in the form of a kiss that was tender and fierce in equal measure, a claiming that was entirely mutual this time. 2 years later, Elena stood once again on the balcony overlooking the valley. But everything about the scene had changed. The stronghold below bustled with activity as pack members prepared for the evening meal. Children played in the courtyard gardens, and the sounds of laughter and conversation drifted up through the mountain air. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, feeling the strong kicks of the pup who would be born in another month. Their child would grow up knowing both sides of their heritage. Kieran's cliff strength and her strategic mind, the Ashford legacy and the Morgan honor that had been restored through truth and justice. "Still working too hard," Kieran observed, joining her on the balcony with the evening reports she'd requested. "Says the alpha who's been in meetings since dawn," Elena replied, but she accepted the documents gratefully. Even heavily pregnant, she found it difficult to step away from the diplomatic work that had become her passion. "The Territorial Council officially approved your proposal for the Interpack Intelligence Sharing Network," he told her. 6 packs have already signed on, with 4 more considering it. Good. Thorne's ability to operate in secrecy was what made his crimes possible. Transparency and accountability will prevent another situation like that. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their pack settle into evening routines. It was a peaceful scene, but Elena's mind was already working on the challenges they'd face tomorrow. Trade negotiations, boundary disputes, and the constant work of maintaining the delicate balance between pack autonomy and regional cooperation. "Do you ever wonder what your parents would think of all this?" Kieran asked quietly. Elena considered the question seriously. Daniel and Marie Morgan had died trying to expose corruption and protect their pack from a leader who valued power over justice. Their daughter now worked to ensure such corruption couldn't flourish in darkness again. "I think they'd be proud," she said finally. "Not because of the titles or the recognition, but because I finally learned to use my voice instead of hiding from it." A strong kick from the pup made her wince, and Kieran's hand immediately covered hers on her belly. Through their bond, she felt his wonder and protectiveness, his excitement about meeting the child who would carry both their legacies forward. "What do you think our daughter will be like?" he asked. "Stubborn, brilliant, and completely unwilling to accept anyone else's definition of what she should be," Elena replied without hesitation. "In other words, she'll be perfect." The healer said it was too early to tell. "Call it Luna's intuition." Elena leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of the man who had seen her potential when she couldn't see it herself. She's going to be a force to be reckoned with. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd started as Thorne's grateful ward, convinced that her highest aspiration was to become Damien's convenient mate. Rejection and betrayal had shattered that limited world, but from the ruins, she'd built something infinitely better. She was Luna of Night Ridge, diplomatic liaison to the Territorial Council, and mate to an alpha who valued her mind as much as her heart. Most importantly, she was herself, fully, authentically, and without apology. The claiming mark on her neck pulsed with warmth as Kieran's arms tightened around her. Through their bond, she felt his absolute certainty in their shared future, his pride in what they'd accomplished together, and his fierce love for the woman she'd become. In the distance, wolves howled their evening songs, not calls of loneliness or loss, but celebrations of pack bonds and territorial security. It was the sound of a community that had weathered crisis and emerged stronger, united by truth instead of divided by lies. Elena added her own voice to the chorus, a Luna's call that carried across the cliffs and beyond. It spoke of justice achieved, love chosen freely, and a future built on the unshakable foundation of knowing exactly who she was and what she was worth. The answering calls came from across the territory, pack members acknowledging their Luna, celebrating the life they'd built together, and welcoming the next generation that would carry their legacy forward. As the last echoes faded into the mountain night, Elena smiled and prepared for tomorrow's challenges, secure in the knowledge that she would face them as herself. Beside the mate who had always seen her true potential, the girl who had once begged for scraps of acceptance was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who commanded respect, created change, and never again would settle for less than she deserved. Elena's story of rising from abandoned bride to powerful Luna proves that our greatest betrayals can become our strongest foundations. But her tale is just one thread in a vast tapestry of supernatural romance. What did you think of Elena's transformation? Which moment resonated most with you? Her confrontation with Margaret, her first tactical victory, or perhaps Kieran seeing her potential when no one else could? Thank you for joining us on this journey through love, betrayal, and redemption. Until next time, may you find the courage to become who you're meant to be. The end.